Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure again to welcome you to yet another edition of the Scale webinar series put together by ACIOE Associates. At this juncture, I'm going to be bringing in someone who's going to help us give more context and more clarity on the conversation and just set the tone and prepare our minds for the journey we're about to embark on this afternoon. And I'll be handing over the reins at this point to Mr. Ilya Johanna, the Scale Advocacy and Engagement Advisor, who is going to share his opening remarks on behalf of the leadership of the project. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. Over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Emmanuel, for putting up this together. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to say good morning again. I'm truly delighted to welcome you all to this webinar, a platform dedicated to exploring the captivating realm of policy advocacy, success stories, and case studies. As we gather together, I see us not as participants, but as change makers, visionaries, and advocates committed to driving positive transformations in our society. Advocacy is a dynamic force that propels change and empowers voices that may otherwise go unheard. For us in Scale, it is a force that brings about transformation in the policies, practices, and perspectives that shape our own society. Through this webinar, we aim to delve into the intricacies of policy advocacy and unveil the strategies that can steer success stories. I know a lot of us have been involved in one way or the other, trying to put up some case studies or put up some success stories around advocacy. So our goal for this webinar is to inspire and educate, to encourage collaboration and innovation, and to enhance our collective understanding of how advocacy can really drive real, tangible change. We have a remarkable speaker. I'm sure very soon we'll hear more about him, who will offer a unique perspective and a wealth of knowledge around this very webinar topic. I like to say that Annie is not a new face within the sector. Annie has been a very, very good friend and has worked around multi-sectoral issues. And I believe that he has all that it takes to be able to put us through some strategies that we can learn to help in documenting our success stories around advocacy. Having said that, I like to just bring the greetings of the leadership of the project through the leadership of Lydia Ode, the Chief of Party of Scale, the Senior Technical Management Team of Scale, and other senior persons in the Scale. The webinar series is an ongoing process, and we have so far, within this year, I've handled over 7 advocacy webinar themes, and I'm sure the process continues again throughout the year. We are happy with what ACIOE is doing and leading through this process. I encourage us, please, to mobilize more people. The more we learn about this process, the better for us as we engage. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And without further much of talk, let's embark on this enlightening journey of discovery and inspiration. Thank you very much, and over, Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for setting the tone and for making us really understand the kind of conversation that we'll be having today and what we need to look forward to. So Aniceptus is a highly self-motivated, goal-oriented, and creative and innovative program manager. He's a community mobilizer, conflict analyst, peace building, and preventing violent extremism specialist. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ani, a facilitator for the session this morning. Thank you so much, sir. And at this point, I'll take a back seat and learn as well from your wealth of knowledge. Over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel. Thanks, participant. I want to say a big thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for taking through the profile. Just to say that we are still students and we'll continue to learn every day. Yeah. So I will just be facilitating, but it's a learning process for all of us. I will just be sharing an experience of a successful advocacy that we were privileged to have carried out, steps that we took, and see one or two things that we could learn from it, and also to mention that we are open to improvement, to see how we could have done better given a different scenario. All right, thank you so much. So I will be talking today briefly on advocacy success stories and case study, and I will be sharing very quickly our experience on how we were able to push for the establishment of the Kogi Youth Development Commission. I make proud to say that the Kogi Development Commission, as it is today, is a product of an advocacy that was successfully carried out in the implementation of a project. And we'll just be looking at just 6 topics where we're looking at what really is advocacy, steps to advocacy, sharing some of the steps that we took that brought us to the success that we got, which also borders around developing the issue, how we're able to map stakeholders that were relevant for the success that we recorded, what accounted for the success, and how we've been able to maintain the success in terms of sustainability. And so I will start with the first introduction that looks at what really is advocacy. And in simple terms, like I will always say, that advocacy simply means an attempt to change the behavior of an institution, And when we talk about changing the behavior of an institution, we're looking at policy influencing, we're looking at policy implementation, we're looking at policy review, we're looking at policy adjustment. These are some of the things that we call advocacy. So when you say you are embarking on advocacy, what it simply means, in a simple term, is that you are pushing for a behavioral change in an institution. And by institution, we mean an organization, And so the question is, what does organizations do? It's not just about what they say, but it's about what they do. So we are interested in changing what institutions do, what organizations do. Is it a ministry? Is it an agency? Is it an organization? Is it, so, and we're looking at structural changes. And for us, in this particular story, we use what we call the critical friend approach. And when we talk about the critical friend approach, the question now is, what are those steps that we took? And so let's look at the first step that we took that brought us the success that we recorded. So the first step, next slide, the first steps look at identifying the problem. You cannot have a successful advocacy without having identified the problem you want to solve. They said, if you do not know where the rain starts beating you, you won't know when the rain stops beating you. And so the problem you want to solve is like the baseline. For every program implementation for other than the development sector, you must have a baseline so that when you get to your end line, you are able to tell the success that you have recorded or the story. So identifying the problem is like establishing a baseline for that advocacy. And for us, what was this problem that we discovered? A baseline of a project that we implemented in Kogi State expressly stated that there was high rate of unemployment, there were illiteracy, because we're implementing a project around preventing violent extremism. And we discovered that structurally, there are serious issues on ground that is making it easy for violent extremism to strive. One of such was youth unemployment, illiteracy, extreme poverty, lack of social cohesion and sense of purpose among youth, So we discovered that, and you could check around even from the federal level to the state. For Kogi State, out of 1.8 million youth plus youth that we have, we discovered that the Ministry of Youth and Sport only cater for a very small portion. Reason being that in the minute when we did analysis of the Ministry of the budget of Kogi State, we discovered that the Ministry of Youth and Sports and Ministry of Women Affairs, their budget put together was not up to the budget of entertainment in government house. What that simply tells you is that the budget, which is the primary governance instrument of the state, had little or nothing to offer in terms of addressing these issues that we have highlighted. And this is also because the Ministry of Youth and Sport, 98% of the budget focuses on sport development rather than youth institutional development. And the question is, how many of our youth are into sport in the state? So having identified the problem, which is what you need to do, identifying the problem. Now the next step 2, you start looking at critically at some of the ways that you need to identify, you need to solve that problem. So the question now would now become, what is your goal? Step 2, what goal are you bringing on board? IT, and that takes us to identifying the solution we want to bring to this problem. So can we look at step 2, please, briefly? Step 2. So the step 2 talks about establishing your goal. And for us to address those problems that I have enumerated in the step 1, which we have identified as a key challenge as to why there is excessive violent extremism in Kogi State, we felt that there was a need for us to bridge that gap that we have identified in the Ministry of Youth and Sport, where we have come to realize that the Ministry of Youth and Sport, is more focused on sport development than youth development. And we sat down together as a team to say, what do we need to do? And this came from the point of fact that, yes, our project is just a 3-year project, but we needed to institutionalize some of the intervention that we were bringing that will be able to address some of the critical things that we have seen that are exacerbating or fueling violent extremism. And so we came up with the notion of pushing for a bill to establish a youth development commission. Why was this important? Because we needed to bridge that, because we discovered that because of this gap that exists, which thankfully the current federal government have tried to correct, where they've now separated Ministry of Sport from Ministry of Youth. So this has been some of the advocacy that we have carried over time. And what has just happened by the current administration is also another success story that we'll get to share some other time. Separating Ministry of Youth and Sport from Ministry of Budget. The Ministry of Youth from Ministry of Youth and Sport. The reason is because the marriage of these two initiatives put focus only on sport development with little or nothing on youth development. So what has happened is that every government that comes in place try to carry out 1 or 2 initiatives towards addressing youth development. So when you see things like YESO, the different youth initiatives, Empower and all those, these are just a way of trying to bridge this gap. So what we now try to propose is establishment of a youth development commission. How can this come to pass? There need to be a law, because we didn't just want something that the governor would just do, because if a new governor comes, it will scrap it. So we needed a law that will back it. And so we pushed for the bill. So the goal we identified was that we felt we addressed that problem that we identified is to set up a legal framework that will be able to focus on everything that we have done, rather than giving people fish, we felt that there was a need for us to teach them how to fish, and we felt that there was a need for us to establish institutions. Step 3. So what do we do next? Now that we've established the goals and we've understood what we needed to do, there was the need for us to now identify those stakeholders that we need to work with. Now we want to push a bill. I'm not from Kogi State, let alone pushing a bill in the House of Assembly. Only an assembly member can push a bill. And so we started pushing, okay, what do we need to do? So we sat down and said, okay, there is the need for us to identify those stakeholders that we need to work with. And so we started up first with the primary constituency. Yes, we need to meet with some youth assembly members we identify, because first you also need to get a sponsor of the bill who must be a House member. And so we started also approaching elected officers, commissioners of line ministries, Ministry of Youth and Sport, Ministry of Budget, special advisors to the governor, and thankfully too, as at that time, the current deputy governor was the chief of staff to the governor, Edward Onoja. And so we also approached him and were able to talk to these people, get their buy-in and say, hey, this is what we want to do. But there was another major stakeholder that we needed to get, and that was take us to step 4. And that is the driver of the process, step 4. What was the approach? We felt that as an organization, it will be difficult for us to push for the bill ourselves, because once you go as an NGO or once you go as a development partner, there's always this belief that money you are coming with, you are a money bag. There's always a belief. And so we said, okay, we need to be in the background. So sometimes you need to choose an approach that will work. Planning the approach. What approach do you think will work? For us, if we go direct, we are likely to hit a brick wall, because it means we need to pay through every process. And so the approach that we felt will work for us was for us to walk through the people that we were supporting. And so we set up what we call the Youth Advocacy Cluster. So if you go to Kogi State today, that cluster, this project has ended over 4 years ago, but that cluster is still in existence, currently even growing stronger, the Youth Advocacy Cluster. And so we made the people, the primary beneficiary of the process to be the ones that will drive it. So what did we do? We sold the idea to them. We established the cluster, worked with them together, look for where some of these things exist. So as at that time, there was a similar bill that was before Akwa Ibom State House of Assembly, but theirs was called Youth Development Agency Bill. But for us, we didn't want to use agency. So we took it, conceptualized it, instead of reinventing the wheel, and then pick it up from there. Then the second thing we did was to build the capacity of the youth cluster themselves so that they become the champions of the process. So who were just like a shadow actor, if you do conflict mapping, we're just like a shadow actor, while we have the people in the forefront who were the key stakeholders as the Youth Advocacy Cluster. So we first identified the approach we needed to use, which was for us to get the youth themselves to drive the process, establish the Youth Advocacy Cluster. And the second thing we did was to build their capacity so they could do the process themselves, have an understanding of the bill and everything. So the process we used was 100% youth-led. Why is this important? This is important because, like I said, when you look at the pros and the cons, you've identified the problem, you've identified the goal, you've identified the kind of stakeholders that you need to push this process. You need to plan the approach you will use to get these people. Is it through propaganda? Is it through advisory? Is it through, we needed to come up with those approaches. And for us, the approach that worked for us was using the primary beneficiaries to be the drivers of the process while we take the passenger seat and get the process driven. So the faces you see in this picture are the faces of the people. This picture you see here was taken on the day of the public hearing when the bill was presented for public scrutiny as a process of the passage of the bill. So these are the faces of the Youth Advocacy Cluster, more the few that this picture could cover that drove the process. So it wasn't the organization that was responsible, but this Youth Advocacy Cluster drove the process that led to the passage of the bill. Next slide. So what accounted for the success? First, the Youth Advocacy Movement Cluster adopted what we call a strategic, disruptive, and youth-led approach. And they were consistent in different in one. Because of the capacity that was built, they were very good in organizing. They were very good in building strategic capacity to push for the bill, at every level. Once the advocacy clusters training was conducted, they started scaling it down to communities, to wards, so the engagement, drove through the state, right from the community constituencies, identifying your house members, the constituencies, every house member was followed up to their, when they are in the state, at the state level, they had people that were engaging them at the state level. When they go to the local government level, they had people that were engaging them at the local government level. So all these were done. So at every point in time, these bills were in the faces of all the House members. The movement was supported to develop their own leadership structure. So it was a movement. It wasn't about us. At a point, it became about them. It became like a Matan fire. Why? Because we're able to make them understand and appreciate the importance of the bill. And one of the things I always tell them that, look, hey, I'm not from Kogi State, but this is something that will naturally drive your process and make you a better youth and a better person. So values were established, constituencies were identified, and most importantly is that they also identified oppositions. By oppositions, as at the time this bill was introduced to the House, we also had another bill which was had already gone through first reading in the House, that was talking about a law to establish a youth development agency. So we felt that the youth development alone is just one of the aspects that the Kogi Youth Development Commission was to address. And so we identified those positions, they identified the competitors, so it's not always you looking at the people that are for you. We needed to also identify the people that might be against, so that we are also able to play the devil's advocate and come up with counter narratives. So before they strike, we already have answers. Before questions are asked, we already have the answers to them. Before moves are taken, we already know how to defend it. So we do not only identify allies, we do not only identify people of similar mind, but we also identify oppositions. We also identify competitors, in that might kick against what we were planning. And so all these strategies, were some of the things that accounted for the success that was recorded. And the youth group were consistent and clear in their demand. They created awareness across the state, helping every stakeholder to comprehend the importance of the bill. And most importantly, there was just one demand: the establishment of a commission to cater for the youth needs, the need of the youth. So it was not a case of people speaking for people. It's a case of people made to speak for themselves. So there was this faith, there was this force, there was this presence, there was this passion, over what was happening. And why was this? Because of the approach that was taken, identifying the real people that can drive this process. So you are pushing for a case for persons living with disability, and you don't have them involved. It will be a big problem. You are pushing for case, for women, and women are not driving the process. That might be a very big problem. So this was one of the things that accounted for the success that we recorded. And then what was the success? Next slide. Now, I'm happy to mention to you that history was made. This bill made two histories. The first history was made 14th of November 2018, where for the first time in the state, a private member bill, which was not an executive bill, was unanimously had 25 over 25 members vote, in the House of Assembly. No dissenting voice. All voice was for, all voted for the success and for the passage of the bill. Why was that? Because at every level, at every engagement, the youths were there to engage with their House members. In fact, at a point, putting on that t-shirt that you saw those youths wear in that picture was even a license, almost like a credit card to say you will win your re-election. Because as at this point again, the state was also warming up for an election the next year, which was 2019. And so wearing that t-shirt was almost like identifying with the youth And that was almost like, you know, an assurances of your next election. So this bill recorded the first history of being one of the first private bill to have 25/25. And on the 24th of April, 2019, about 5 months after the bill was passed, you know, the bill was officially assented to by the governor, Alhaji Adoza Yahaya Bello, after an extensive consultation with his cabinet. Now, why was this an history? This bill became the first private member bill that was passed by the State House of Assembly and was assented to by a sitting governor, the first in the history of Kogi State. And so, and when the governor was signing the bill, there was also clarity as to what the bill was meant to do. And he said on the day that he signed the bill, that the bill for him was laudable and timely because he felt that it will transit Kogi youth from being vice-prone to active, active in the aspect of value-adding activities such as technical work, agriculture, and information technology. These were quotes, you know, from the governor on the day the bill was signed. You know, so if you look at the story, the journey, you discover that it was a trajectory journey that took every step seriously. And I can tell you that should you take all these steps, you know, the likelihood of succeeding in any advocacy venture you want to go into is likely to be there because of this result that we got. Now that the result is gotten, were we in Uhuru yet? The answer was no. After the bill was signed, what next? Implementation became very important. And so how have we maintained the success so far? One of the first things that we did was to advocate for the board to be inaugurated, which was the board that the law was to establish that would drive the process. And immediately the board was inaugurated, the first thing we did was to invite the board members and we organized a capacity training for them. The reason was because immediately the bill was signed, it became a government property. And not 100% surprising, but surprisingly, 90% of those that were appointed board members were not taken from the people that pushed for the bill. And so there was a minimal understanding of what the bill was established to do by even the members of the board. So the only way we could ensure that this bill or this law or the commission as established succeed was for the board to members to be trained. So immediately we invited the board members, took them outside Kogi State to somewhere in Akwanga in Nasarawa State, and had a 3 days residential robust training for them, starting with unbundling, making them to understand the bill, doing a critical understanding of the bill, of the bill that established the law, or rather the law now establishing the commission. Did a very critical training for them so that they will all have a bigger understanding and also pour out the vision that we have as to those problems that we identified that led to identifying the goal, you know, that pushed us into pushing for the establishment of this commission. We had to bring them up to speed. So there was a need for that clarity. And once we did that, we didn't leave them at that. We started networking them, mentoring them, you know. For almost a year, I was still visiting, you know, the office, going to meet them, following up with them, supporting them to create different budgets, you know. Yeah, so we're able to support them to set up systems that could work, you know, network them with different stakeholders, and eventually we were able to ensure that they are on their feet. As I speak to you today, that commission is standing strong and doing fantastically well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Mr. Ani, for taking us on that journey of a case study that is an advocacy and success story. A number of questions are coming on in the chat box. I still give our participants a minute to catch their breath and also type their questions while I still I ask you some of my own. But before we go further, I think at this point I'll bring in ACIE's M&E lead on the scale project, because a lot of you made mention a number of times on monitoring, evaluation, and tracking. So that Henry Joma, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. So that if we have any questions around that angle, he can provide further context. Right. So the first question I have, which is a question that comes up a lot among our scale partners and even those who are taking part in our capacity building training, is how to effectively report your attribution when putting together your success story, right? Because in most cases, you might just play a bit part. You might not have the overwhelming ownership of a particular advocacy initiative. You might not be the one to take it from start to finish, right? You may maybe play a certain part, or maybe it's a coalition. So you don't say, oh, Emmanuel led to the signing of this law, right? So we have that issue of attribution. So how do we manage that as practitioners in civil society when you're part of a process, you're part of a success story? How do you report it to effectively reflect the level of attribution that you contributed in the success?
All right, so thank you so much. So yes, we encountered some of this, and it's actually very clear. Henry, we also attest to the fact that when you are clear with the goal, you know, step 2 talks about setting the goal. Once you are clear with the goal, and then don't be too ambitious. This bill took us almost a year, and we reported quarterly. So for the first quarter, our mandate that we set for ourselves was to say, if we could get this bill before the House. So once the bill was read for the first time in the House, that was a success for us. You know, because you need to define what is success at every point in time, looking at your milestones, the things you want to achieve. So once you have clarity as to the milestone you want to achieve and the goal, and then you have this documented, you know, attribution can only come when you have all your processes well documented. So for example, there could be different people that supported this process, but once you are able to show evidence of the steps, first the problem you identified, the results you set out to do, and then you are also able to track the interventions that you did. And once you can link those interventions to the sources that you have set out. So for example, we have evidences of the of the bill that we drafted, as at when it was a draft. We have evidences of the advocacy meetings that we had with all the youth advocacy cluster. They had attendance sheet to show, pictures to show. So all these were well documented. So the moment the bill was read in the House for the first time, and because we were following through, we were also privileged to be informed when the bill was to be read for the first time. And so we're also in attendance. You know, we sat at the gallery, you know, of the House. And again, another thing that I also advise is in advocacy, a very key stakeholder that you need to partner with is the media. So for every step we took that seems like a success for us, we had the media present, and they also help in publicizing this. So even media clips, media stories now is no longer, thank God we are no longer in the time where we need to be cutting newspapers to keep. Now, just with the link, you know, you could save the link for it. So if you even go on your dashboard, on your Google search now, and just type Kogi Youth Development Commission bill, once you click enter, you will see all the media stories that came during, even up to the training, you know, that we had for the board members. You know, so the media also play a very key role in also helping you ensure that your attribution does not become a problem to you. Because with all the stories that we had piled up, and that bill was passed, the day if I come out to say we did this, it will be difficult for you to argue with me, because once you Google it, you will see all of this. Just Google Kogi Youth Development Commission bill. You know, once you click enter, you will see all the stories, you know, on how that came to be. Over.
All right. Thank you so much, Annie. I think I'll just take this. I wanted to add a question on measurement, but let me just bring this up because I think there's something, again, like I said at the top, I don't want us to take for granted that everyone on the webinar is at the same knowledge level. I understand you took us on a journey, but I think some advocates on the call now are asking, I'm doing something similar, or I have done something similar, but I don't seem to be able to project it and let people see and know that it is a success story. So is there a framework that you could share with us on how to effectively document and write a success story? Are there ingredients of a success story that must be, and should something come before something? Is there a strategic framework or a programming framework that we need to use to report success stories?
One of the things that I do that has supported the work I do over time is not playing down the role of communication colleagues. And so documentation at every point is very critical. And that's why I told you about the role of the media, ensuring that the media is part of what you are doing at every point in time. And so your ability to document, and success to you might not be success to me. And that's why I talked about the fact that you need to have clear goals. And you also need to have clear success at every milestone. So first reading of the, in fact, first getting the draft of the bill was a success story for us. And it was documented. The second thing was getting the bill read in the first time in the House, first reading, was a success for us. It was well documented. You know, I give you a typical example of what I'm currently doing. Currently, I am in the process of establishing women's safe spaces in some communities in Kaduna and Zamfara State. And what were some of the things I have set in place? For sustainability, I have said we need the communities to contribute the land that will build the women's safe spaces. And just day before yesterday, on Monday, 3 communities have provided the land. And as I'm talking to you, if you Google it, you will see the story. We carried media even to the place that it was being done. We have not completed it, but merely getting the land contributed by the community for the project for us is a success story already. It's documented, both as a human story angle and also media. Online, if you Google it now, you will see community contributes land to international alert for women's safe space. Fighting SGBV, community contributes land to international alert. Google what I just told you now, you will see the story online. This just happened 3 days ago. So there must be a conscious effort to ensure that these things are kept in the public domain. 10 years from now, you could still get access to those stories, even if your hard drive, you know, develop faults and you cannot get your pictures, you will get these stories. So for advocacy in particular, there is a need for you to consciously make noise about it, because it's even in the noise that you are even likely to get more success. Because we have come to realize that on issues as advocacy, remember my simple definition of advocacy, causing an institutional behavioral change. No institution in most instances wants to change from what they are used to. It is a very difficult thing. One of the reasons why it's difficult for you to get a new element introduced to the budget of the country or to a state is because the ministry is already used to the templates the way it is. And for them to introduce a new line is always very difficult for them. So they rather kill that move than to introduce that line. They want to remain the way they are. So for you to push an advocacy case, you need to ensure that that area of propaganda, quote and unquote, is clearly defined, and you will be conscious about it. So documentations in terms of success stories, in terms of online stories, in terms of media, you know, is very, very key, you know, for you to, mostly when it comes to advocacy. Over.
All right, thank you so much, Annie. Henry, I'll bring you up in here, still on the subject of the framework, because I see then the direct, I hope I did not murder your name, is asking if such a framework can be shared, right? So Annie has spoken to the importance of involving the media and drafting the story, but I think Zendi wants to be a bit more streamlined in, okay, maybe I have no idea what to even write or how to even write it to give the media to begin with, right? So what should be the components of the framework that some should guide the compilation of a success story?
Okay, I think Annie alluded to it when he first spoke, that there are basic things, basic ingredients, and those basic ingredients are informed by what you define as your success from each point. So if there are things you have considered to be success at every point, those constitute the milestones that you are measuring. I would like that we are not so boxed in, because many efforts, the efforts may look like they are the same, but they have different approaches to it. So in measuring or documenting what you have done, you need a bit of creativity, creativity that matches the work that you are doing. So in the case of what the case study we have just listened to is one that was almost directly, managed by the group that was working on it, Annie and his group. In some other cases, you may have multiple actors, multiple stakeholders working from different angles. We have done something related to that around let me give you an instance, the Electoral Amendments Act of 2022. There were multiple stakeholders were working on that particular electoral bill. So you are going to have, you will not be able to have a straightforward framework to use to document your story. So your own success stories will be defined by you at the level of your contribution. So we could work around a normal academic M&E framework, that's proper. But when you have a specific activity, then you must identify the certain milestones that constitute success within that work that you are doing. So a little bit of creativity is needed for every single project, and that's why people must sit around and think about what they're implementing.
All right, thank you, Henry, for that. And we have more questions coming in, so I'll just move on a bit faster. So the next question is, in advocacy, sometimes we don't get to the light at the end of the tunnel, like Annie's case study where history was made, right? Sometimes it's a long process, especially when you're dealing in policy advocacy. It could be long drawn out. So, but there are successes that could be recorded along the way, right? There are things that could be brought in that previously did not exist. So how do we measure these incremental successes, and how do we project it, especially considering that probably the overall goal has not yet been met, but some successes have been garnered along the way. So we don't just wait till that big goal, right? Even a little thing, even getting the youth, for example, in this case, the youth cluster, that could be, or that was indeed a success story in and of itself. So how do we begin to report or take note of these incremental successes along the journey towards an effective advocacy?
I had mentioned this earlier. It's about what you define as success. And I always advise, even when we are developing proposals, I always advise that we should not be over ambitious. Because behavioral change, both institutional and human, is something that is difficult to measure. And so you check the activities you want to carry out and be very fair to yourself in not being too ambitious. So like I said, passage of the bill is the end, or a means to an end, as it were in this case. But there were steps, just like you have mentioned. There were different steps that were taken, and at every point in time is a success. And the celebration of that success is as important as how you take it. So, for example, the establishment of the youth cluster is a success on its own. That is youth organizing. So if you tell the story, that is already a big success. Getting the bill drafted alone and reviewed by a legal person and comes out clean is a success that should be reported. Being read in the House for the first time, I remember the bill being read was our second quarter result success when on the project. A second quarter, not even a first quarter. First reading was a second quarter result for us, a big result. So you need to define what is success to you at every given time. Don't be over ambitious. And also, once you identify what is a success to you, that's why the second step is very important. What is the goal? Once you have the goal, then you need to have your different objectives, you know, and every objective will have an expected outcome, which is the result you intend to achieve at every objective you are given. And so that is the reason why it needs to be very clear. So these are processes you need to think through. So for example, I want to get to Lagos from Abuja. How do I need to get there? That is the approach. Am I going by road? If I'm going by road, fine. What is success for me? Getting a bus that will take me to Lagos is a success. And once I achieve that, it should be documented and celebrated. Once you take off, moving that the bus tires have started rolling is a success. So if you are not mindful of this, you will not notice this when it comes. Getting to Lokoja, which is halfway, is a success. Proceeding to Ore is a success. And then eventually getting to Lagos. So you must identify all these steps very clearly as you plan what you are doing, so that when it happens, you are able to identify it and make sure you document it properly. Because one thing that has happened to us over time is, because we are not able to, we trivialize certain things and would not see them as big deal, we are not able to celebrate them, and then we lose them. Meanwhile, same thing, someone else could just achieve, and it becomes a very big story. So we should be mindful of when we get these things, and then we should be able to document them properly. That's why I tell you that in everything I do not take for granted the role of my communication team. You know, so I ensure I carry them along in everything because of that documentation. So to answer your question straight, setting achievable goals in real time, identifying them, documenting them, and celebrating them is very key towards achieving. So don't just look at only the big story as a result. Also look at those steps that we're taking. You know, we pushed for the first bill to establish the person's the VAP law, Violence Against Persons Prohibition bill in Kogi State. The first was passed by the House, but was not assented to. We celebrated it. Why was it not assented to? We discovered, and we went back to our drawing board in the next legislative section, and we reintroduced it again with the lessons that we learned in the first one. You know, and we're able to make a case, and then eventually it scaled through. So if you do not celebrate, review, know where you missed it to correct, then it will also be a problem. But that it went through for the first time was a big success for us. Over.
Thank you so much, Annie. Caleb Raphael has a question. He says that for being a private-led project, what is the envisioned timeline? I think it's asking if the advocacy you're putting together is led by the private sector, is because, you know, they all work with baselines and targets. So what should be like an acceptable envisioned timeline for the project?
Okay, so the timeline in this context differ. The timeline might, because every legislative session has a 4 years duration. So if your project is a 5 years project and you have a 4 years legislative session in it, it means your timeline for this bill is actually for the legislative time, because every bill that does not scale through before the end of a legislative session dies a natural death. You know, no bill is transferred to a new legislative year. What it means is that if this assembly does not pass any bill by the end of this assembly, the current 10th assembly, by the time it closes, every bill dies. If you want it again, you need to reintroduce it. So that is the first timeline. The second timeline is your own project timeline. If your project timeline is 2 years, and then if you do not have enough machinery in place to push it, in our case, we had such, so that's why your approach is also very important. If you are able to set a machinery in place that will drive it without you being there again, then the legislative year timeline is the timeline. If not, if your project ends, probably you might not be able to do any other thing again. That could also be the other timeline. So there are two timelines, your project timeline or the legislative calendar timeline.
All right, thank you so much. Another question from our good friend Oche Joel. He says, how can success be measured at the level of activity in implementing projects that is related to human rights abuses?
Yeah, so before Henry, Henry is the M&E guy here. So before Henry will come in, like I've mentioned earlier, the success is what you define as success. So the success you will be looking for must be tied to what the result you have. So if, for example, for human rights abuses case, the intervention you want to carry out is freeing people whose rights are being abused in police stations, right? In the prisons, right? People that are being held unjustly, or people that are in police custody for some time and then their cases are not being heard. If that is what your intervention is, and then you have a result that says within the quarter, you want to ensure that you follow up with 10 inmates for their release. The word is follow up, not being released. So if you are able to visit, and within that quarter, 10 cases were revealed, and you have documented evidence of the 10 cases that are now being looked into as a result of your visitation, that is success. They have not been released, but your result was 10 cases be looked into, right? Or the process commenced. That is success. But for somebody that says 10 inmates released, that will not be a success, except 10 inmates were released. So it is what you define as result that will determine what your success will be. Over, Henry.
Over to you, Henry.
Yeah, you have absolutely explained it. And the other thing anybody can do would be what, again, links to what you have been saying all the time, Annie, about documentation. So when you have clearly defined those milestones, those indicators, then you must document. A very simple tool, and maybe this will equally answer the other question, very simple tool that people can use, and this is just for every starter. If you are not able to use high-end M&E frameworks, you can use what is called a story book. So you create a story. Those stories could be, scheduled in steps. So the way Andy did his presentation, for instance, it says step 1, step 2. You could take that like as a storybook. So you create a storybook of all your activities. We know that many times in projects, we say that the activities does not matter so much. It is the results that come from the activities. But in many advocacy issues, the activities are quite important because the outcome is a long way off. So you document those immediate results by creating a storybook. So in step 1, this was done, and this pointed towards this. So there must be some kind of correlation between each of those steps that have been taken leading to the results. So when you create a storybook, that in itself helps you.
All right, thank you so much, Henry and Annie. I still see some comments and some prompts of people who really want to maybe have a visual look at an actual success story framework. And so I'm going to be sharing a template framework from Palladium. As we said, the brains behind the Nigerian Scale project. And so if the backend have that ready, please could we project that success story framework from Palladium, from Scale, right? If you could increase the font a bit so that we could just briefly run through it. So, right, so there are various content and condiments and elements of a standard success story framework, right? So we just look at the overview there. It says a compelling success story brings powerful statistics and programmatic progress, right, using a personal narrative. Please, if you could go down a bit, let's get down to the actual framework, right? So this was designed by Palladium to guide the Scale clusters and partners in reporting all the great work that they're doing across various thematic areas in an advocacy, right? So this is an example. So you have a section there, right? You have the success story is the passage of the process of crime bureau, right? Similar to Annie's case, which was the youth bill in Kogi State. So this gives a context to the bill, what the bill is about, what the bill does, right? You see, in this case, it gives powers to the state, right? And then you have the inputs, right? So who are the people that are working on this, right? So in this case, you have USAID, Palladium, Scale Partners, or the anchors. In Annie's case, it was his organization as well as the youth cluster that they gave the onus to drive the process. If you could go down a bit, thank you. Right, so this just speaks to the bill and all that it goes to show. So coming down now to the framework, right, very important. You have the justification, right? So why are we doing this to begin with? Annie spoke to how they identified that the amount of money that was going to entertainment in the State House was more than what was given for youth and women development in the state, right? So that justification of misplaced priority from the budgetary or funding perspective that justified the Advocacy Acts, right? So who is the subject of your story? Don't forget, you've already done the work, right? So this is you now telling the story. Who is the subject? What is the result or the activity that you're implementing to benefit this subject, right? When did this occur? It's very important to have these what we call on the project MOVs, these means of verification, right? You have your date, you have your attendance sheet if it was such an event, you have your pictures and all whatnot. Please, let's just go down. We still have some questions. I just want to run through this for those who need a framework, right? So relevance, just hold on a bit. Back end, please just come up a bit to relevance. Thank you. Relevance, let's come up to relevance. Yeah, thank you. Right, so select the categories that this story symbolizes. Now, you might not have this framework in the work that you're doing, but this just guides you to understand the relevance. So what exactly is your story aligning to in the overall objective of the organization? So in Scale's situation of Scale Palladium, these are some of the areas that are the focus of the project, right? So you identify what relevance does this act have to the organization and in the grand scheme of things. Please go down a bit more. Thank you. Right, so the problem statement, right? So this intervention is important because of XYZ. Annie spoke about at the top of his presentation, advocacy and what it means in terms of triggering behavioral or policy change. So there has to be a problem for you to want to change it, but you have to make anyone reading this story. Don't forget, the whole idea is that at looking at this document, at your framework, at your success story, like Annie said, we should go to the link. Once you go to that Google link, even when I was not part of any aspect of the project, I should be able to read your success story and understand everything. You have to take me on a journey. That's why it's literally called a story, right? So your problem statement has to be there in clear, black, and white, right? You can have sources that you're citing to validate or justify your story. Please go down a bit. Let's just run through this, go to the next page, right? So now you have the details, right? So what was the practice before? You can, anywhere you see scale, replace it with your organization, right? So what was obtainable, right? What are you trying to change, right? What is your role? The first question I asked Annie was towards attribution. So what is your role? We understand it's a big, most advocacy matters are quite complex. So you might not solve everything. You might solve a little aspect of a bigger problem. So let us know what your role is in your success story. Don't just be ambiguous with it. What outcomes resulted from your work, right? So from the 14th of November 2018, the governor signed this into law. That's an outcome, right? So this part is the main feature of your story. So you've given us the justification and the relevance. Now let's dive into the details of what you actually did and what it led to. Please just go down a bit more. Thank you. Right, and so if you interviewed people, we had some interviews in the process, right? Don't forget, it's a story. So you draft this in a way that makes it enticing to someone. Oh, so I went to XYZ community and I interviewed this person, I interviewed that person, just to give some more substance to your story, right? And again, put your MOVs there. Who is this person? Why was it relevant for this person to be interviewed? What did you guys discuss about? What concerns did the person share? How did this feed into your overall work? Please just go down a bit. So as many of the key interviews that you had in there, you put them there. Again, this is a framework that will guide you. You understand the number of interviews and the kind of interviews to report based on the kind of story and the kind of work that you did. Please go down a bit, right? And then, of course, you have to have pictures. I talked about your movies. You have to have pictures that are of good quality. It's a story. You don't want poor quality or poor content to distract someone. And of course, if it's a picture of a community like the one Annie shared, picture of the people that are beneficiaries, please ensure that you get consent and you understand that they know what you're using the picture for. Thank you very much, Bakken. I just wanted to share this framework that was developed by Palladium to give some more context on what a typical framework or design of a success story should look like. I think we have one more question. So the question is for Annie, and it's exactly linked to your presentation. So the question is, how did you handle diversity? It's from Habiba Umar. So she wants to know how you handle diversity among the youths in executing your work. I think we briefly lost Mr. Annie.
No, sorry, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I only changed
your device.
I changed device. Yeah.
Okay. I think a backend will spotlight you anytime now. You'd attempt that question for
okay,
us.
Yeah. So for us, one of the ways we handle diversity was even from the drafting of the bill before it became law. So for example, on the bill, for everywhere they say Kogi indigene, we replaced with Kogi state residents, because indigene will have limited whoever will benefit from the bill. So that's the reason why today, if you look at the formation of the board members of the commission, we have 2 non-indigenous of Kogi State represented in the bill, in the commission, right, as board members. So it is from the foundation, from the bill itself, and so when we were also pushing for the membership of the Advocacy Youth Cluster, that also became a selling point for us, where we were able to visit all the non-indigenous associations. So, for example, the Ndigbo community was visited in Kogi. The Fulani community, headed by Baba Fulani, was visited. We ensured that all these groups, were visited, and they all played role in the bill, in the passage of the bill and in supporting the bill. Why? Because we noticed that singular thing that will have killed the issue of inclusion and diversity, and we ensured that it was well taken care of right from the instrument itself that we were selling. And even in when we did jingles, we ensured that Kogi is a state that has diverse tribes, but 3 major ones. We made sure that jingles were developed in those 3 languages, not tending towards one end. And we also ensured that we were able to, one of the activities that there were a series of activities that were carried out. One of those was the Cultural Youth Fiesta, where we also displayed culture, pushing for this bill. All the cultural groups in Kogi State were represented, and even gave prizes and awards, to each of them. So from the drafting, diversity was looked into and adequately catered for to ensure that we left no one behind. Over.
Okay, thank you so much, Annie. We're talking on success stories, and like any other story, we could go on and on if we allow ourselves, but we have to be mindful of time and ensure that it's a work day so that we can leave our wonderful participants to go back to pursue their regular business. So it has been a pleasure, Annie Setus and Henry. Thank you for anchoring this Q&A session and the technical facilitation aspect of the webinar. Thank you so much, and we hope to do further work with you as we continue to build the capacity across the larger civil society in Nigeria. Thank you. Participants, we've come to the end of the facilitation, but like I said at the top of the webinar, we want to understand and have an idea of the knowledge and the insights that you've gained from this webinar. So at this point, the post-webinar poll will be projected, and we'll crave your indulgence to take the time to just attempt the poll and vote on all the questions. I think it's just a brief 6-question poll. Let us know what you've gained from the webinar, what really stood out for you, how do you rate the quality, and also want to have an idea or a notion of what topics you'd like us to put together future webinars on. So please, I crave your indulgence, like I said earlier, to be good if everyone just takes out the time to vote. It's just a brief 6-question poll. Thank you. I can see some people already voting. Please, let's vote before we round up and then we leave for today. And thank you so much for staying with us this hour and about 15 minutes. It's been a pleasure putting this together, and we hope that you've learned as much as I have learned from the session. I would at this juncture welcome in on behalf of the managing partner of ACIOE Associates, Madam Ona Peters. She is the Legal, Public Policy and Government Relations Manager at ACIOE Associates. And on behalf of the managing partner, she'll be sharing a closing remarks to just thank us for spending time with us today. Welcome, Madam Ona.
This was a very exciting webinar. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I would wish to thank all the people that participated. We thank USAID, Palladium, and ACIO for their invaluable support. We would like to thank the Chief of Party of Scale and all the senior team that made this possible. I would like to thank our erudite speaker, Mr. Anicentus, for his insightful presentation on advocacy success story. And his practical approach to the subject made it so easy for us to understand, and I hope we can all emulate it. We wish to thank all the participants for taking out time from their busy schedule to join this webinar. And as the moderator, Mr. Emmanuel, explained, this is a series of webinars, and we hope to see you in the next webinar that we will organize. And we hope that as you go back to your advocacy, you can harness all the skills that we learned from the schedules and the success story from Mr. Aniso and apply to our advocacies, even as we go out to change Nigeria and change the story about Nigeria in various areas of our advocacy. Thank you once again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day and your week as we continue in our advocacy in relevant areas. Thank you very much. Bye.